stop everything. In the last few hours, something absolutely extraordinary just happened that could reshape the entire landscape of American power. We're talking about a seismic shift in the halls of Congress, where the Senate, in a stunning display of defiance, has just blocked emergency powers that were being pushed through in a desperate bid to consolidate control. This isn't some minor procedural hiccup. This is the Senate slamming the door on what many saw as an inevitable escalation of authority. The target here is none other than former President Donald Trump, who's been maneuvering behind the scenes to invoke these powers amid ongoing legal battles and political turmoil. Triggered by a razor-thin vote in an emergency session called late into the night, this decision was made behind closed doors, with whispers of intense lobbying and arm-twisting echoing through the Capitol corridors. It all unfolded just minutes ago as the final tally came in, sending shockwaves through the political establishment. Picture this. Senators from both sides of the aisle, usually divided by party lines, finding a rare moment of unity or perhaps calculated self-preservation to reject the proposal. The emergency powers in question were framed as necessary for national security, citing vague threats of election interference and border crisis. But critics argued they were a thinly veiled attempt to bypass judicial oversight and rally loyalists. Trump's camp had been building momentum for weeks, with rallies and social media blasts painting a picture of a rigged system out to get him. But tonight, that narrative hit a brick wall. As the vote concluded, reports flooded in of Trump himself reacting furiously from his Mar-a-Lago estate, screaming rigged in all caps across his Truth Social platform, accusing the Senate of betrayal and vowing retribution. His inner circle described the scene as chaotic, with advisers scrambling to draft counter-statements, while the former president paced red-faced and incredulous. This blockade isn't just about denying powers. It's a direct challenge to Trump's lingering influence within the GOP. For years, he's been the kingmaker, the figure who could make or break careers with a single endorsement. But now, with legal news tightening around multiple indictments, from election subversion to classified documents, the Senate's move signals that the party's patience is wearing thin. Key Republicans, who once bent over backward to defend him, cast votes against the measure, citing constitutional concerns and the need to uphold democratic norms. Democrats, of course, were unified in opposition, but it's the GOP defections that sting the most. Names like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham stayed notably silent in the lead-up, their absence from the pro-Trump chorus speaking volumes. This vote, taken in the dead of night to avoid immediate public scrutiny, marks a pivotal moment where institutional loyalty trumps personal allegiance. The timeline is frantic. It started this morning with urgent calls for the session, escalated through heated debates in committee rooms, and culminated in the floor vote just hours ago. Insiders say the push for emergency powers was accelerated by a recent court ruling that denied Trump's appeal in a high-profile case, forcing his team to seek alternative routes to shield him from accountability. But the Senate, perhaps sensing the winds of change, refused to play along. This refusal isn't merely symbolic. It activates a cascade of potential consequences, from heightened scrutiny on Trump's finances to possible contempt proceedings if he defies related subpoenas. The atmosphere in Washington is electric, with reporters camped outside the Capitol, capturing reactions from shell-shocked aides and triumphant opponents. Trump's scream of rigged has already gone viral, amassing millions of views and igniting his base, who see this as yet another deep state conspiracy. As we dive deeper, it's clear this is no routine procedure. This kind of blockade only happens when confidence in a leader's invincibility starts to crumble, when the protective bubble bursts. The Senate's action indicates a shift from passive resistance to active enforcement, a sign that the system is no longer willing to bend. Powerful forces have just moved against Trump, and what we are witnessing has never unfolded quite like this before. A former president still wielding enormous influence, being openly rebuffed by the very institution he once commanded. By the end of this unfolding drama, the situation might look irreversible, with alliances fracturing and the path to redemption narrowing. Stay with me as we unpack the unprecedented signals this sends. This is not standard political conflict. This only happens when control collapses and the facade of unity shatters. Institutional behavior now indicates a loss of patience, a pivot to enforcement mode, where procedure gives way to protection of the Republic. The Senate's blockade of these emergency powers isn't an isolated incident. It's a flare signaling that the system is in full rebellion against what many perceive as an overreach by Trump and his allies. Former allies and party leaders are no longer defending him with the vigor they once did. Instead, there's a palpable silence from key names like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, who have historically been quick to rally to his side. Private reactions among GOP insiders are described as panic, with frantic calls and texts circulating about distancing themselves to avoid collateral damage. Public loyalty has been replaced by caution, hedging statements that praise Trump's past achievements while sidestepping the current controversy. The political meaning is stark. They see what's coming, a potential unraveling that could drag the entire party down. This betrayal marks a turning point where survival instincts kick in over blind allegiance. Think about it. Just months ago, Trump was the undisputed frontrunner for any Republican resurgence, his endorsements gold in primaries. But with mounting legal pressures and poll numbers showing voter fatigue, the calculus has changed. Senate Majority Leader, whoever holds that title in this heated moment, issued a TUR statement post-vote, emphasizing the need for checks and balances without mentioning Trump by name. A clear hedge. Committees that once stalled investigations are now quietly gearing up for hearings with whispers of subpoenas ready to fly. Diving into the behind-the-scenes read, institutions are acting in coordination and with unusual speed, suggesting a belief that Trump's resistance is weakening. This strategy phase is all about containment, isolating the fallout to prevent it from spreading like wildfire through the political ecosystem. The objective: control the narrative, prevent any narrative escape routes for Trump, and lock positions before the public fully digests the news. Coordination is evident in how the vote aligned with recent judicial decisions. It's as if the branches of government are syncing up, a rare display of unity against a common threat. Speed is key. The session was convened with minimal notice, catching Trump's team off guard and limiting their ability to mobilize supporters. Silence is another tool. No grand press conferences, just a simple announcement buried in the late-night news cycle. This minimizes immediate backlash while allowing the decision to sink in. Belief in weakening resistance stems from Trump's recent setbacks, lost appeals, leaked documents showing vulnerabilities, and a base that's enthusiastic but not as mobilized as before. By isolating him, the Senate aims to limit damage, ensuring that the rebellion doesn't spiral into broader anarchy, but instead funnels into structured accountability. Now, the legal and power cascade this unleashes is profound. This action activates enforcement mechanisms baked into the Constitution, setting the stage for possible outcomes like contempt proceedings. If Trump ignores related orders, seizure of assets, freeze on accounts, or even arrest warrants aren't off the table if defiance escalates. The removal process for any lingering influence could accelerate, perhaps through impeachment echoes or disqualification efforts. This is a constitutional showdown in the making, where one move forces the next through legal obligations and automatic triggers. For instance, blocking the powers automatically revives stalled court cases, compelling witnesses to testify under renewed pressure. Trump's reaction, that visceral scream of rigged, only amplifies the cascade, painting him as unhinged to moderates while firing up extremists. But the system is designed for this checks that prevent any one figure from dominating. As the rebellion solidifies, expect the power struggle to shift from politics to enforcement, rhetoric to mechanism, loyalty to survival. The capital, already a tinderbox, plunges deeper into anarchy as factions realign. One move now forces the next through legal obligation and automatic triggers, turning what began as a Senate vote into a chain reaction across the branches of government. By blocking the emergency powers, the Senate has effectively activated dormant enforcement mechanisms that had been held in abeyance during Trump's period of maximum influence. This isn't speculation. It's baked into statutes and constitutional precedents designed precisely for moments when executive overreach threatens the balance of power. The immediate cascade includes revived contempt proceedings tied to earlier subpoenas Trump had stonewalled, now with fresh momentum because the Senate has signaled it will no longer shield him from accountability. Prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions, federal and state, are already moving to leverage this opening, filing motions to compel testimony and unsealed documents that had been delayed pending resolution of the emergency powers question. Possible outcomes now include seizure of assets linked to alleged financial improprieties, freezes on accounts that could fundraising operations, and even arrest warrants if defiance crosses into clear obstruction. The removal process, while not impeachment in the classic sense, since Trump no longer holds office, takes the form of accelerated disqualification efforts under the 14th Amendment or parallel legislative maneuvers to bar future candidacy. This constitutional showdown is no longer hypothetical. It's unfolding in real time as clerks rush filings, judges clear dockets, and marshals prepare for potential enforcement actions. The beauty or horror, depending on perspective of the system, is its self-executing nature. Once the Senate drew the line, obligations kicked in automatically, leaving little room for negotiation or delay. Behind closed doors, the coordination is meticulous. Congressional leadership has been in constant contact with Department of Justice officials, ensuring that enforcement remains measured yet relentless. The strategy phase has shifted decisively to isolation. Trump's inner circle is being peeled away one by one through targeted leaks, quiet warnings, and offers of leniency for cooperation. Damage limiting is the priority. Contain the chaos to Trump himself and prevent it from metastasizing into a broader GOP crisis or public unrest that could destabilize markets and international confidence. Objective number 1 is narrative control. Frame this as responsible governance rather than a partisan hit job, allowing moderate Republicans to justify their votes without alienating the base entirely. Trump's camp, meanwhile, is scrambling. Emergency filings are being drafted even as we speak. Motions to reconsider, appeals to friendly circuits, requests for stays. But each one faces an uphill battle now that the Senate has refused to provide the political cover those maneuvers once enjoyed. Counter orders are being prepared, ranging from calls for special sessions to fiery executive-style declarations from Mar-a-Lago. But without institutional backing, they risk ringing hollow. The shift is unmistakable. Politics, enforcement, rhetoric, mechanism, loyalty, survival. What was once a game of public perception has become a contest of who controls the levers of actual power. Public defiance statements from Trump are expected imminently, likely laced with familiar grievances about rigged elections, weaponized justice, and deep state betrayal. His base will respond with predictable fury, online storms, rally calls, perhaps street demonstrations, but the institutions appear prepared. Security perimeters around federal buildings have been quietly strengthened, and law enforcement briefings now treat potential unrest as a live contingency rather than a distant hypothetical. Global reactions are already trickling in. European capitals expressing cautious relief at signs of US institutional resilience. Asian allies watching nervously for any spillover into trade or security commitments. And authoritarian regimes quietly taking notes on how democracies handle internal threats. This cascade is not reversible in the short term. Each step locks the next into place, narrowing the paths available to Trump and his allies. The Senate's mutiny has plunged the Capitol into a form of controlled anarchy. Rules are being followed with ruthless precision, yet the atmosphere crackles with the tension of a system testing its own breaking point. Expect public defiance statements to dominate the next news cycle, each one calibrated to inflame the base, while carefully avoiding language that could be used directly in contempt citations. Emergency filings will flood carouses from Washington to Atlanta to New York, seeking injunctions, mandamus relief, or outright dismissal of revived cases. But judges sensing the shifted political winds are unlikely to grant sweeping stays. Counter-orders from Trump's orbit could include attempts to rally sympathetic governors or state legislatores to pass protective resolutions, though most such efforts will founder on the same institutional reluctance now evident in the Senate. Global reactions will intensify. NATO partners issuing guarded statements about democratic stability. UN diplomats privately expressing concern over US credibility. Financial markets twitching at every fresh headline. The power struggle has decisively shifted. What once played out in tweets, rallies, and cable news segments now operates through warrants, depositions, and asset freeze notices. Rhetoric still matters. Trump's voice remains potent, but mechanism increasingly dictates outcomes. Loyalty, the currency that once bought near total impunity, has been replaced by survival calculations. Insiders who once boasted of unbreakable bonds are now lawyering up, negotiating plea deals, or simply going silent. The fracturing is visible at every level. Campaign staff quietly updating resumes, donor networks, rerouting funds, media allies softening coverage to preserve access. This phase is volatile precisely because the old rules no longer apply in the same way. Trump's team will attempt to reframe the Senate blockade as proof of corruption, doubling down on the rigged narrative to maintain mobilization. Yet each escalation risks accelerating the very enforcement cascade they hope to disrupt. A single missteps and overly inflammatory statement, a call that could be construed as incitement, could trigger rapid escalation from containment to open confrontation. Meanwhile, the institutions press their advantage with deliberate speed. Sealed indictments rumored to be nearing unsealing. Grand juries reconvening. Forensic accountants poring over long-shelved financial trails. The Capitol itself feels different tonight. Hallways that once buzzed with deference now carry an air of grim determination. Staffers speak in hushed tones about protecting the institution, a phrase that has become code for drawing hard lines against any individual, no matter how powerful. The mutiny is no longer hidden. It is being normalized, framed as the system doing exactly what it was designed to do when one figure threatens to overwhelm it. International institutions are watching closely. NATO briefings now include dedicated segments on US domestic stability. UN Security Council members exchange private assessments of American executive authority. Key allies in Asia and Europe quietly reposition diplomatic and military postures in anticipation of possible distraction or dysfunction in Washington. Credibility damage to the US legal system is already measurable. Foreign ministries cite the Senate vote as evidence that checks still function, yet simultaneously express unease at the spectacle of a former president under such sustained pressure. The executive branch's aura of invincibility has cracked, raising questions about alliance commitments. If domestic chaos persists, risks are multiplying. Diplomatic isolation, if partners conclude. Washington is too consumed internally to lead. Market shock as uncertainty feeds volatility in equities, bonds, and the dollar. Security repositioning as adversaries probe for weakness. Yet, the deeper impact is systemic. This is no longer a story about one person. It is a test of the American system itself. Whether its guardrails hold when subjected to maximum stress from a charismatic, polarizing figure who commands fierce devotion from millions. Outcomes now narrow to three stark possibilities. Enforcement in which, accountability mechanisms complete their work without catastrophic breakdown. Collapse if defiance spirals into widespread refusal to accept institutional outcomes. Or historic confrontation, a direct clash between branches that forces a constitutional reckoning unprecedented in modern times. After this moment, nothing returns to normal. Precedents are being set to about the limits of emergency powers, the durability of congressional backbone, the consequences of treating loyalty as a blank check. The situation is now accelerating, slipping out of containment. The Senate's mutiny has released forces that cannot easily be recalled. Whether the system emerges stronger or scarred, the test is live, the stakes historic, and the verdict still being written in real,